Hey everyone, my name is Melanie Grant, and welcome back to our second part of Coding Clinic questions for our class 2030 specifics. Okay, so by now you should be deep down into section 2 of your class where we're learning about CNM coding, and I imagine several of you are going to be having questions very soon as we go forward into week 6 and later week 7. So this is just a quick overview of some of the things that have been brought to me during the first few weeks of our class, and we've had a little bit of a scarce attendance in Coding Clinic, but that's okay because there's been some great questions both in person as well as online. One of the things that I've had brought up to me a few times is some difficulty with the book format. Now, everybody's new with this, so when you're looking at your CPT coding book, I tend to have a lot of students who really just kind of get stuck in the weeds on how to read it. It's different than the other coding systems. And so some of the guidelines aren't very specific, or they're not in the same kind of places that you're used to seeing them when you're working with the ICD-10, CM, or PCS. So let's take a moment to kind of glance at some of those questions. When I flip anywhere into my book, I'm automatically met with a specific section, subheadings, various codes, indented codes, and standalone codes. Some of the formats of the book that I'll point out to you on the side of your book, you have the actual section that you're in. So most of your coding is done in the surgical section of CPT, and I'm on page 237 of the 2019 professional edition from the AMA. And on this page, it is the Cardiovascular, which is code series 33010 through 39599. Okay, so this is the first way that I can tell where am I at. And when you get into surgical coding during section 3, it's extremely important to pay attention to that. Also, at the top of the page, you can also see surgery, and I know it's backwards in the video, just pay attention to where I'm pointing. Surgery, cardiovascular system, and it repeats those codes here for what's on that specific page. Now, each of those subheadings within the section of surgery for cardiovascular is going to be identified. In my book, it's blue with a little line and it's bigger letters, and it tells me information about that section. So this subsection for heart-lung transplant has in-section guidelines that apply to everything following the heart-lung transplant until there's a new subsection. So if I look for the next subsection, I find that on the next page for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or so on and so forth. I can't read too much of that upside down. But that means that everything in this heart-lung transplant, those are your guidelines that are in section for these services. Oftentimes I find questions about how do I know which one I should have selected. In this case, it tells you information about the code set that's here and some of the specifics that are broken down. Sometimes it's details about the level of service or the type of service. Other times it's specific expectations that go along with it. And I can guarantee you if you're taking a coding test, it's going to be in your coding guidelines that they have the answers to many of your questions. And when you're taking an RHIT test, it's up to you to know those guidelines on a general basis. Okay, so basic surgical guidelines are a must. Now, if we skip ahead or skip back to the beginning of this cardiovascular section, in my book, it's marked with that green. So I can go to the very front, and I can find that it gives me information about surgery for the cardiovascular system, tells me the list of headings and subheadings within the system. And so I can find those very specifically. I have some anatomy drawings, which are really nice. That's not always available. It depends on your book. In mine, I have several of them, which is always a good thing. And there's a little bit of guidelines for the cardiovascular system before the actual codes start, which means those guidelines apply to everything in the cardiovascular. And you're going to see that throughout the book. So we should be a little familiar with that by now. But if you're a little confused still, the other thing to keep in mind is always looking at your code sets by the headings and subheadings or sections. I tend to call them sections. There's not a difference between sections and subsections, except that we're talking about how are we breaking down the area of coding that we're looking at. So most people say cardiovascular system. I say the cardiovascular section, and then the area or the heading is cardiovascular. The subheading is cardiac valves, okay? So you'll find that a lot of times we'll break it down that way. Now, when I'm looking at these codes, the important thing to always identify is what we talk about by indented and standalone codes. So on page 225, I'm going to give you an example of code. I'm looking for a small one that doesn't have a lot of writing. So I'm going to give you a short version of the example of code 33361. And it goes on to read transcatheter or aortic valve replacement, TAVR/TAVI, with prosthetic valve, semicolon, percutaneous femoral artery approach. So one thing to keep in mind, a standalone code always starts next to the code, not indented, and starts with a capital letter. Transcatheter, so on and so forth, with aortic valve replacement with prosthetic valve. So we'll just write the shorthand here. Those little dots will represent everything in between. Semicolon, percutaneous femoral approach. Okay? Now, an indented code, let's say that you look at 33362 is indented. It's lowercased and it's a lot shorter. Open femoral approach. Okay? So I can see that it's indented because it doesn't start next to the code, and I can see that it's lowercase, indicating to me that this is not a standalone code. It needs the description from the previous standalone code in this subheading that's identified with this code to find the full description. And it's up to you as the coder to determine what that is by reading up. Now this case, 33361 and 33362 is easy because 33362 is directly below the standalone code. But when you have several codes, 33363, and it has some description, 33364, and it has some description, and 33365, and let's say that this is the code you're looking at for transaortic approach. And the one above it is, I'll actually write it out here real quick, just so you can see what my book looks like. We have open iliac artery approach. And open auxiliary approach. Okay, so each of these, even though I didn't line them up perfectly, imagine that they are, each of these is an indented code, which is part of the code 33361. That is your standalone code, the code with the full description. So to read 33365, you would not look at 33364, and you would not read 33365 by itself. Instead, what you would do is you would go up until you found an indented code, 33361, and read transcatheter aortic valve replacement with prosthetic valve, stop, transaortic approach. Okay, so if that still doesn't make sense, make sure you reach out to me, ask if we can sit down and talk about a coding clinic, talk about a one-on-one, because some of the time it's little things like this that can really confuse you when you're looking at your coding. And until you know the difference, you'll continue to get it wrong. And so it's never a problem that you're looking at something incorrectly. It's only a problem if we do nothing about it. So don't look at it like you're missing a lot of questions and it's a big issue either. When we look at our workbook assignments, one of the reasons that I give the extra credit the way I do is to make you go back and look at the codes, look at what you did wrong, determine what is the difference, how should I have found this elsewise, and learn from that. And I like to give credit for that because it's a hard task. Okay, one of the other questions I'm having a lot of, and it happens every time, and not to worry, if you're a person who's asking about modifiers, is stuck on modifiers, or just has no idea whatsoever with modifiers, that's okay. Take a deep breath, let it out. Modifiers are a thorn in everyone's foot. So, one of the things in the front of your AMA coding book for CPT is the modifier shortcut on the cover of the page. These are the most common modifiers organized by different sections to help you with what you'll commonly see. Don't forget that you have Appendix A and B in the back of the book, which has all the modifiers with their full description, and it breaks down the difference between them on page 791. Okay, now in the CPT code book, the shortcut page on the cover page or the cover of the book does have some HCPCS modifiers because those are what's most common. The thing to keep in mind with HCPCS, these modifiers, yes, are a bit intrusive. They can be a little scary. There's a lot of them, and it's not always clear when one is used over the other. Okay, so for the most part, some tips about modifiers. Number one, okay, just breathe. That's the first thing I can say. Just breathe with modifiers. It will be indicated to you if you get something missing or something wrong. You'll be able to go back and see what modifiers apply. There's a few of them that you should always look for, but outside of that, especially with some of the HCPCS modifiers, if you're not told something specific that seems unique, it probably won't apply. Okay, so let's say that again. If you're not told something about a service that seems unique, such as an insurance-based mandate, or that they are a Medicare patient, meaning look at Medicare modifiers, or a Medicaid patient, or Blue Cross Blue Shield, specific modifiers are built for those insurance companies. So if you're not part of that insurance program, it's a good chance they won't apply for some of those just weird, off-the-ball ones with reporting. Okay, another tip I can give you is always report laterality when it applies and or digits. Okay, so those are going to use your HCPCS modifiers. You have your left, your right, your bilateral 50, which is in CPT. All of your I modifiers, all of your T modifiers, your fingers, your toes, and your eyelids where they're located. Outside of that, laterality is not reported separately, but always reported if you know it, if it applies to your code, your procedure code, okay? Now keep in mind, if a procedure does not talk about something that would indicate a laterality, it's not going to have a laterality modifier, okay? So for example, an office visit or an exam would not include laterality because that's an exam of the patient. A scope done to one side of the ears when the procedure indicates that it's done on both sides of the ears would not require laterality, but rather would require reduced services. Okay? However, a procedure done to one ear, and it just says one ear, would require laterality because there's two ears. If that's not clear as mud, that's okay. You're learning this as you go, and it's something that coders are constantly learning and updating their knowledge base on. The next thing is payment modifiers. Things that affect payment. If it's a bilateral procedure, then that means that it's going to be two procedures. Technically, the service only describes one side of something. So if we put a 50 for bilateral, we're indicating we want double the payment or payment and a half as it actually turns out. So if it's a payment modifier, always list it. And when we talk about sequencing, these should be listed first if there's multiple modifiers that apply. Another example, when we talk about reduced or discontinued services, those are services that are less than a full procedure. And so the payment for those, when we have that modifier, is less to identify what we would usually get paid. And so those are called payment modifiers. Other payment modifiers, such as unusual services, would indicate to us to give us more money. And for 25 or 59, for services that are unrelated to other services, those allow payment. Also 24 allows payment, and those apply specifically when it's appropriate, but would be listed first with payment modifiers. Okay, anesthesia modifiers. You have two different types of anesthesia, okay? You have your P status, and you have your modifiers for who performed. In general, there's not an indication of which one should come first. I've always seen it where the P status modifier comes first, followed by the modifier appropriate for who performed the procedure for the anesthesia. In the case where you have an insurance-specific requirement, you would just follow the insurance guidance. A lot of times they'll just automatically reject it and say, please list this first, or they won't reject it and they'll go ahead and process it. So unless you have more than 4 modifiers, it's not really a big deal in reporting and billing. I know that your Connect has had some issues, and if you submit an assignment where you've put it in and it's just in the wrong order according to Connect, send me a print screen of that and I will give you full credit for that assignment or for that question on that assignment. Which leads us last into questions about sequencing. So other than sequencing modifiers, and if you have more questions you want to go over with me, let me know. I've had some great questions about procedure sequencing. So how do we know what order to sequence a procedure, which one should come first, which one should come second, and how do we know where to put the modifiers in general, okay? So there's a couple of things that I'll point out to you that I've gone over this week with some of our students with great questions. Number one is your primary procedure is always listed first. How do I identify this is a little tricky. But typically it's what did the patient come in for? What did the documentation really make it clear that we were planning to do today? Were there additional procedures with that? And if so, were they part of multiple procedures with this, which would be a 51 modifier, or was there procedures completely separate? Okay, so what is the primary procedure? What is another word you can say is purpose? If there's more than one that is equal, so 2 or more equal procedures. Now these are not necessarily guidelines in your book, but this is great questions. How would we want to report this? Well, this goes down to a billing question because remember that we always put 51 or 59 modifier on the procedure that is secondary to the primary procedure. If both procedures are addressed equally, you can list them in either order. However, the 51 or 59 should be on the less of the 2 procedures. So less work, less time, or less cost. Okay? And the best way for most providers look at is based off of the cost, because that cost is identifying how much work and time should be going into that procedure. Ones that take more typically cost more. And so if you look at the fee schedules that we have accessible to us for Medicare fee schedules, you can look at cost. Another tip is to look at the NCCI edits, the column 1 and 2. This one is going to be a key in determining which procedure is a primary procedure because it will identify under column 1 the primary procedure, and column 2, procedures that either bundle or require a modifier to pay. Now that only works with some of the denied procedures, but if you go back into Learning Module 1, you'll be able to find where we did that exercise and pulled up column 1, column 2 in CCI edits, okay? So if any of that's confusing, that's okay. Feel free to reach out to me. Try to stop by a coding clinic if you can. Schedule your one-on-one coding review with me, and make sure to let me know where you're at so that we can make sure that you have all of the best resources available to you. That's it for 2030 specifics on coding clinic questions. Make sure to check out our videos this week for our 2030 Learning Module 6. Have a great time. I've lost my mouse. Have a great day.